How you guys doing? And welcome to the Google Hangout, WIT Talmidim. I'd like to first of all thank everybody for joining us, and I want to introduce one of the new members of the WIT Talmidim, very respected in my mind, the authority of the temple service in the Western world, and not many people know temple like he does. He is my teacher, my friend, and a mentor. His name is Joseph Good. Joe, can you please say hello to everybody, introduce yourself, and tell them about your website and what you do?
Live down in southeast Texas, right on the coast, where there's alligators.
Okay.
We have two websites. We have hatikva.org, and then we have JerusalemTempleStudy.com. And the JerusalemTempleStudy.com is a member site, and it has teachings on everything, but in specific, it really deals with the temple. We have a course that we're developing, which is a very advanced course on the temple to teach people.
How long have you been studying temple service now?
30 some odd years.
Yeah, I've been studying with you for a little while. For a while now, we've been studying together. I got the privilege to have access to Joe and study directly with him on Skype and things like that. And I think it's a great addition to what we're doing here, trying to bring credible teachers in certain areas that could help us grow. So in the future, Joe will also be able to do teachings here and for our benefit. And we also have Ryan. Ryan, say hello, and Tyler, say hello.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
That was a quick hello.
I just want to hear what Joe has to say about what we're teaching. I'm so excited about him being on the panel. I can't stand it.
Well, as somebody who studies the temple service myself, I remember when I started in full-time ministry, the first thing I heard was, "Do you know Joseph Good?" I said, "No, I did not know." And someone, Margot Dahl from California, she gave me some of your a tape, and then Pat Cisneros. Do you remember her, Joe? Pat
who?
She's a lady from California, Pat Cisneros. He had a whole series of your temple stuff, and
okay.
She follow it. And that's how I heard about you, and then later on I got a chance to meet you and talk to you. And by the way, I want to make mention of something that is important. Whatever you heard about Joe, it's not true. I bear witness to that. We talk all the time, and it's really sad that, unfortunately, people don't take advantage of the wisdom the Father's given my brother. So I'm really excited. Actually, you know what? Let's talk a little bit different. Can you stay with us the whole time, Joe?
How long's the meeting going to be?
It could be an hour to an hour and a half. You don't have to stay the whole time. If you need to go, I understand.
I'm gonna try to stay the whole time.
Okay, good. Well, so why don't we just engage you today about the temple? All right. There's been some of the. I was going to do something, but I'm going to put it aside because I really want to highlight temple service, something that Ryan and I study. Ryan is becoming pretty much an expert in the areas of ancient Near Eastern function of blood and sacrifices from an ancient Near Eastern perspective. I study the temple from the ancient Near Eastern perspective too. So even though you and we study the same areas, but we are connecting it from different views and different areas and different perspectives, and I think that's important. But one of the things
I think it's important too.
Yes, I think one of the things that I think we need to try to bring out is many people are teaching different things about the temple, but what we're noticing is that a lot of the people that are teaching on the temple is not really some of their areas of expertise. And I want to take the opportunity to have you here to ask you some of the questions that people normally ask. For example, how do you know that the temple of Herod's temple sat on the Temple Mount and not in the city of David like everybody says?
Okay. Well, first off, you're going to the conference in Dallas. There is a magazine that's coming out, and they're going to be promoting it at that conference. They asked me to write an article, and I wrote an article on the location of the temple. And so that's going to be handed out there. Originally, they said write a 4-page article. It can be 8 pages, but it'll have to be divided up into 2 issues. I wrote a 12-page article, and they decided to put the whole thing in. So at any rate, there's 4 different theories of where the temple is located. One is 3 are on what we call the Temple Mount, and one is down at the Gihon Springs. So on the Temple Mount, we have a northern theory, we have a central theory, we have a southern theory. And then the question of the Gihon Spring, which is the city of David, south of the Temple Mount. We can prove that the Temple Mount is the location because there is a stone that was discovered back following 1967 when Professor Benjamin Mazar, when he excavated the southern steps and the southwestern corner of the Temple Mount, the rubble was about 40 feet deep. They discovered a stone that's called the trumpeting stone. Now, the trumpeting stone is mentioned in the Mishnah, in the tractate Sukkah. It's also mentioned by Josephus. There was a place on a corner of the Temple Mount where a Kohen, a priest, would come and he would blow a silver, not a shofar, but a silver trumpet to announce the oncoming of the Shabbat, the oncoming of the various festivals, and so forth. Now, they find the trumpeting stone, but they also found the top corner pieces, which weighed several tons, that were in the rubble. And those, by the way, are there at the southwestern corner. It's inconceivable that if the temple was at the Gihon Springs, which is a half mile to the south, that the Romans would have picked this stone up, carried it all the way up several tons to put it there to confuse people at a later date. So we know the Temple Mount. There's many, many other ways that we know the Temple Mount is the actual location of the temple. In addition, we can disqualify what is called the northern theory, put forth by Asher Kaufman, because there is a moat that was discovered. It's written of in the book of Maccabees, also by Josephus. It was discovered by Charles Warren in 1868. In the Asher Kaufman northern theory, his northern wall of the temple courtyard is in the moat. It won't work. Now, there's another theory called the southern theory, which is at the Al-Quds fountain. This is put forth by Tuvia Segev, an Israeli architect. And the problem there is that his southern wall was not part of the Temple Mount until we get to the Shimon Hasmonai expanded the temple to the south, and his southern wall would be in that area where it was expanded to. We have a rule in the temple. This is a biblical rule that you cannot change the blueprint of the temple. So what was there in the first temple was there in the second temple. You can't move structures around and so forth. So that's a real short version of it.
What happened?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay, so go ahead, Ryan.
The Dome of the Rock.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Joseph, I had a question. Is what I see from a lot of these groups that claim it's in a different location is that they want to build the temple of God on the same, right side by side with the mosque there, or just build it without taking down that mosque. Can you have that mosque standing there next to the temple of God?
No, you can't. Hashem's not going to share the his holy temple with a mosque. It's not going to be a place for those that believe in him and those that follow Islam. The two are not going to mix. And so I don't know what the future of the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque is, but I can say this: it's not good. Hashem will take care of it, but literally where the Dome of the Rock is, we've established that is where the temple of the Holy of Holies was located. I have a new book that's coming out. I hope to send it into the publishers within the next week, and it's 308 pages, but it's basically on the buildings of the inner courtyard. How do we know where the temple is located? How can we come down to precise measurements? And let me just say one more thing. There is a platform that the temple is built on, and it's called the Kel, C-H-E-I-L in English. It comes from the Hebrew word kol, which means common or profane. It's the common area of the inner courtyards. Now, this platform is level because it's a mountaintop. We have found the Kel on the south, and we have found the Kel on the north. We measured the distance between them, and it split the dome of the rock right in the middle. It's pretty amazing.
Explain the term Cheo, because a lot of people may not know what that means.
Hell, during the Havdalah, we have a prayer that's called Lahamadvil. And we start off Lahamadvil ben Kodesh L'Kol, to separate between the holy and the common. All right, so this word Kol means the common. Now, it's the common area of the inner courtyard where they could sit down, where they could lay down, where they could do all types of functions, because in the inner courtyard, the Azarah, you are not allowed to sit unless you're king descended from David. You can't turn your back on the Holy of Holies. You can't cut across it for a shortcut. You can't spit. You can't do all kinds of things because of its sanctification. Now, in the camp, though, you can do all of those things. So it's getting into a very complex matter, but let me just throw this out there. We're going to take the high priest. Now, usually the high priest is an elderly fellow, and we're going to have him in a building that's attached to the inner courtyard, and he's going to stay there for 1 week before Yom Kippur. Now, he cannot make any mistakes on Yom Kippur. I believe everybody's pretty aware of that. So here's a problem. If he can't sit down, how is he going to sleep? What is he going to do during that week? What about going to the restroom? What about going to the toilets? So all of this has to be worked out. Now, there is a ruling that if you have a building or gate open into the inner courtyard, the Azarah, it has the sanctification of the Azarah, of the inner courtyard. But if that same building also open to the Kel, then in that end of the building, then it has the rules of the Kel. The whole building has the sanctification of the inner courtyard, but in that end, they would be able to sit, they would be able to sleep. You're a Sanhedrin, they're judges. A judge is required to sit. A person coming before the Sanhedrin has to stand, okay? The court sits in the inner courtyard because that's a Torah commandment. It has to be before the tent of meeting, the old Kel Moed. And so this is how it was performed, is by having an opening to the Kel and an opening to the inner courtyard. That's complex, but you can immediately start to see that it's very involved. As you start to learn about this, it'll teach you about sanctification. It teaches you about the word holy. It teaches you about concepts that are all through the Torah that we never realized were there.
It's just like when we were doing, you and I were doing a study together, and I mentioned a verse from Ephesians, and you said that's all connected with Yom Kippur, and then you kind of went for 2 hours telling me about that. But there was a verse in Micah, which the language was when there's weeping between the porch and the altar, and
that's a Joel. That's a Joel.
Joel chapter 2, right? Yeah, Joel chapter 2.
Right. And in Micah 5, it says that the high priest would stand in the power of his name, which is a term for Yom Kippur.
Right. So go ahead, Tyler. She's gone. Okay. Okay, so Joe, let's talk a little bit about. We're going to talk. The topic of tonight was going to be equity and justice. So what we're going to do, we're going to talk about temple and trying to understand the temple from the language of equity and justice. You know, that one of the things that I've noticed, and you can bear witness with me, is that when, and Ryan, you know this, is that when we were studying the ancient Near East, we quickly realized that the righteousness and justice of the temple of God was completely different than any other pagan temple. In other words, there's a distinction not only in holiness, but the word holy was not only used in Israel, it was also used with different words. The concept of holiness, like if you follow, for example, the God of the Egyptians, you were separated to that God. So what I'm saying is, the word kadosh, holy in the Hebrew, they had the same concept in their own language of what holy meant to them, even though we know the holiness of God is completely different than the holiness of anybody else. But one of the things that I'm really interested in, that I want to talk about tonight, is the equity that we see and the way justice is done in the temple compared to the way the nations do it or the way the pagans did it. For example, correct me if I'm wrong here, I don't remember if it's the Asham or the Chata'at being killed in the same place as the Olah. And
They're
that's
killed in the same place.
The same place.
Yes,
So,
north of the altar.
Right, north of the altar. And people ask me all the time, why do they have to do that? And I tell them, because the Creator does not want to he doesn't want to embarrass the person bringing it. It's a protection for the integrity of the person. They're already coming to make restitution. They're already coming to be restored. And one little piece of information that everybody overlooks is the fact that the Creator says, if you do this, you bring it here. If you do this, you bring it there. So the people watching will not see that this person transgressed against the Lord, but is trying to bring restoration or a free will offering. Can you expand a little bit of that?
Yes. Actually, the slaughter area, your inner courtyard was a ceremonial courtyard. It's not where the people congregated.
Right.
The people congregated in the court of the women. So the court of the women isn't called the court of the women because that's where only women were allowed. It's because women, men, children were allowed in that court. Those that went into the upper court, what we call the Azarah, where we have the temple building, the altar, where we have the Levitical choir will stand on the platform called the Dukhan. We're going to have three groups of people. They're going to be priests, Levites, and Israelites. Now, the Israelites that are there are going to be representatives of all the districts throughout the land of Israel. There are 24 districts. They're going to be standing there. They have been selected, they've been chosen, and they are there representing their district. And they will pray the prayers, or they'll pray the same prayers that are being prayed by a Cohen who's been selected to go in and burn incense. Okay, so it's a ceremonial courtyard. Now, if you're standing in the court of Israel, you cannot even see into the slaughterhouse area because it's about 6 feet above your head.
Right.
So you can't see it. Now, if you're up there, everything is designed, as you mentioned, so that no one would be intimidated by coming to bring a particular type of offering,
or even shamed, because
shamed. That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
Shame was very prevalent.
When you go to bring your animal, you have to make a declaration. And you tell the Kohen what you're there for, what type of korban it's going to be, what's going to be done. Now, the procedure for doing it for a korban hasham, a trespass offering, or korban hata'at, hatat is a sin offering, is exactly the same. So nobody knows whether you're bringing a peace offering, a trespass offering, a sin offering. That's not their business. That's between you and God.
Yes.
Okay.
I think, which is fascinating, Joe, because it shows the integrity and the honor of the Creator, trying to, making sure that it's your business with Him. It's not for the whole world to know so that He can shame you. And I think that's a really strong message. Another thing that I want to talk to you about, and Tyler and Ryan, make sure you jump in if you have a question. But you said something earlier when we were describing the temple, and you said that the priest, which we already understood that, the priest could not sit anywhere in the area where he was officiating, but except the king of the line of David, who can sit in that area.
Right.
Now,
King Agrippa wasn't allowed to sit because he was not descended from David.
right.
Okay.
So that brings to memory the verse in Thessalonians, which says, "The son of perdition will come in, and he will sit as if he is God." So,
Yes.
tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, he's a counterfeit. He's not just an anti-Messiah. He's presenting himself as Yeshua. In fact, I believe that he's going to come and he's going to say to the masses, he's Jesus. He's going to look the part. He's going to act the part. He's descended from David. And I think that's a key passage, that he sits in the temple acting as though he was God.
Right. Which, well, so when he sits there, then immediately the altar is defiled, the Tamid offering or the Tamid fire is extinguished, and thus the Great Tribulation starts, because that becomes what is called Ma'al, and a transgression directly against God.
Yes. Now they'll put up an image in the temple. In fact, we believe at this point that there will be several images that will be put up. I saw a comment in the chats that were going on today about the image of jealousy from the book of Ezekiel. But we think we've got located where these images will be placed within the inner courtyard.
Okay, tell us where.
Okay, one will be in the Shor HaKorban, the sacrifice gate. One will be within the holy place. Yeshua basically told us that when you see the abomination and desolation stand in the HaKodesh, which is a room, a temple. We believe also that up on the altar there will be an image that's placed there.
Okay.
We believe that there will be actually two different types of images. One is an Asherah, one is an Asherim.
I find it interesting because Ryan and I were talking about the eagle that the Romans wanted to put in the temple that you find in the book of Josephus.
That's right.
Which will be an abomination to the temple.
Right. It almost caused a war back at the time of Pontius Pilate.
And that's why it was decreed to bring a sacrifice on behalf of Caesar instead of a sacrifice to Caesar.
Rico, let me throw a question at you.
Oh man, why? Why are you doing this to me?
And everybody else.
Okay.
Now, righteousness and justice, I would equate with righteous and equity.
Repeat that again.
Righteousness and justice, I would equate with righteousness and equity.
Okay, keep going.
Okay. Now, we have this two places primarily in the Tanakh that phrase. Both of these deal with the temple. Are you aware of that?
No, I was not. Where? Talk to me. Come on.
Okay, so we have it in the Torah.
Okay.
In Devarim 16. Deuteronomy 16.
What verse?
This is the first verse of Parshat Shoftim. Judges and officers. This is verse 18.
Okay, that's Deuteronomy 16, verse 18.
Yes.
Appoint
officers.
judges.
Yeah, go ahead.
Appoint judges and officers within all your gates, which Elohim is giving you according to your tribes, and they shall judge the people with righteous right ruling.
Righteous judgment, basically.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that is the ultimate. As we go on down into chapter 17, verse 8, we see that it brings it to the supreme court of all these courts, which is the which sat in the inner courtyard.
Okay.
Now, as you go through, you can see in verse 21 of chapter 16, where it says, "You shall not plant for yourself an idolatrous tree, any tree, near the altar of Hashem." See, the context is the temple.
Right.
All right? Go to Isaiah 56.
Got it.
All right, I want to read a verse out of Isaiah 56, verse 7. "I will bring them to my holy mountain, and I'll gladden them in my house of prayer. Their elevation offerings, their feast offerings will find favor on my altar, for my house will be called a house of prayer for all the peoples.
All people, that's equity.
Right. 1. Thus said Hashem, observe justice and perform righteousness, for my salvation is soon to come. And then it goes in the non-Jew that had joined himself to Hashem. And so this is, but it's in the context of the temple. So basically what you're talking, righteousness and equity, is very much. My wife, her big message is the temple is a place of unification. It is a place where we come together. It's a place where our difficulties are resolved.
Reconciliation and restoration, for sure. One of the things that I've noticed in Scripture, and we've been studying, I'm going to talk about in tomorrow's Torah teaching, is the fact of what is called equity. I'm taking it from the teaching on the appointment of the Levites. The Levites are consecrated and they have a role. We know that the priests have a role. Even though they have a role, and the judges have a role, and the priests and the Levites have a role, but that only put them in a position of authority for the sake of bringing order to the kingdom, but that did not put them in a position for them to do injustice and for them to do unrighteous acts. In other words, they needed to lead because they're representing the Creator. So
that's right.
So therefore, if equity was the essence of the Torah, righteousness is the essence of the Torah. The essence of the Torah is how to be a kingdom with equal rights, with distinctive roles, and for the land, for the inheritance, for the rights of. By the way, now I understand why women were so desperately in the first century. A lot of the women wanted to follow the God of Israel, especially Greek and Roman women. Why? Because the way they were treated according to Torah was more equitable than the way the Roman system was.
Yes.
So it's only logical when you begin to look into the ancient world that the Torah really does not make classes of people. If anything, it's not a caste system like in India right now and like in ancient imperial Rome. And that's what I wanted to talk about. And the temple teaches us that. The only reason why the women are separated from the men in certain areas is because of the levels of Kedusha. Correct?
Yes. Right. Now, let me add to that.
Please.
Another part of all of your other temples and all of your other people and religions, they're centered basically on several elements. One is going to be warfare. The other is going to be economy. All right. Now, at the base of economy is going to be agriculture, and there are talking that they're gods and goddesses, and their priests and their priestesses. It's going to be in a sexually based worship, and so the women belong to the inner courtyard, not to discriminate against them, but to set the record straight that this was not a religion or a faith, sexual idolatry,
right.
All the themes of paganism. And so basically the women were kept back lest the other nations think, well, that's what's going on.
And I'm glad you bring that point up, because what we see is when you study ancient Near Eastern rituals and priestesses and imperial cult and prostitution, fornication in the imperial worship, then you really understand why women were not allowed to be priestesses and things like you just said. It's making a contrast. They're treating the women in Israel with a higher level of integrity and honor than they would in the other nations. Tyler, Ryan, you have anything to add to this?
I would just add, a lot of times people, I've seen people kind of get upset about this. Oh, well, why can't women be priests? Yada, yada, yada. The thing is we've got to understand in Israel, and especially Yeshua, how he came to restore. Right, Yeshua came. He came. If you read the language of the New Testament, he came as the king. Right, Messiah is a term for king. Son of God is a term for the king. All of these terms are terminology around that, and yet he came as a servant. Right, and so if there is any inkling of a caste system, in reality it's an upside down caste system where the Levites were supposed to serve the people. They didn't get inheritance, right? They weren't the upper class. They were the lower class who was supported by the rest of the people. So any sort of advantage is counterbalanced with other disadvantages. So everyone has that equity versus equality. Equality means everyone has exactly the same thing, whereas equity means, and this was a question, equity means that everyone is given what they need to succeed, not necessarily having the same thing.
Right, and the point that you're making about the caste system, like if, for example, in Rome and in Egypt, it was the gods, and then there was Pharaoh, and then there was the different division of people. And this is something that I want to throw out there, you guys, because I'm doing a lot of research on this. And in my research on some of the Egyptology thing that I'm doing, we find out that in ancient Egypt, they believed that only the priests could hear the voice of their God. Okay, only the priests. That's it. The king, Pharaoh, and the priests. That's it. Now, can you imagine Israel going out of Egypt? They go to the mountain, and the first thing God says is, I'll make you a nation of priests. And then the next chapter, what happens? They all hear the voice of God. I mean, how revolutionary. Talk about a caste system in Egypt that only the access to God, and I found out, by the way, that not everybody can go to their temples. Only certain people can go to the temples. That's why they have family gods. And that's why they have, district gods. And that's why they have national temples. So imagine what a contrast that this oppressed people in Egypt that had no access to any other gods of the Egyptians, only a certain class of people can do it, who manipulated the whole system. Now when Israel go to Mount Sinai, the Lord says, if you obey me, you do this, I'll make you peculiar people and a nation of priests. Can you imagine? And then on chapters 20, they hear the voice of the Lord. And that's revolutionary. But we never really thought about it from that perspective. I mean, talk about the Creator bringing an honor of an oppressed people to the level of priests. In other words, Israel's going to be different. You're going to have the opportunity to hear the voice of your king, not like in Egypt. Unfortunately for Israel, they worship the mixed multitude, and the people worship the golden calf, and then that was passed on to the priests. But even after that, though, the prophets came bringing the message from their great king. So even people had the opportunity to hear the voice of the Creator, thus says the Lord, through the prophets of through the voice of the prophets, which is not the same one as the Balaam, or even Balaam had to speak the prophecies that God told him, the word of the Lord. Is that making sense? So I don't know if any of you have ever considered from that perspective, but that's another layer of why the Lord says you're going to be now a nation of priests. In Exodus 19, no one ever considers about the fact how they lived and how the caste system was in Egypt, and what the Lord is trying to do. What the Lord is trying to do is, you're no longer slaves. You're going to have access to your king. And I think that's what the temple is all about. Everybody was welcome. All the nations have come. So why is it that now we are establishing a caste system in a religious system again? We are saying, well, Gentiles don't fit, only Jews fit, or Christians fit, the Jews don't fit. When the God that we serve, Elohim, he's the Adonai of equity and justice. Are we doing then the bad example? If we don't really walk according to his righteousness, and we make a distinction of people, then we are not being his representatives. Anybody? Go ahead, Tyler.
Well, and that was what was going on in Galatians, wasn't it? It looks like we had a great body of Jews who were, some were believers in Yeshua, some were not. And then we have former Gentiles who, it would appear that before the people came from James, were sharing table fellowship, who were uniting around the constitution of the kingdom, the Torah. And it would appear that things were going very well until people came from James, and then all of a sudden even Peter, was being led astray. So, we do see just completely lost my train of thought. But that was what the whole of Acts 15 was about, redressing this problem. Is it righteous and is it just to have this division? Obviously, they didn't have the division at first in Galatia, but then, when subjected to some peer pressure, people kind of gave in and factions formed. So, righteousness and justice dictates that we do come together, and there is a system of equity, not a system of equity where anything goes, but when people are dedicated to worshiping Yehovah, and when they're dedicated to, in their hearts, keeping the Torah and honoring the kingdom, the king, and his laws, there should be a recognition that we are brothers and sisters and that we're united in everything that means anything.
Thank you, Tyler. Joe, remember when the teaching that I did on the house of Shamai and Hillel was a teaching
Yes.
that basically you provoked, you inspired me to do, because I saw one of your teachings on Galatians, and I think that right now it would be great if you give us a little inkling about the arguments between the house of Shamai and Hillel in regards to what to do, exactly what Tyler was saying, that created that kind of enmity. Are you there, Joe? He's cutting off.
Well, I can talk about it if you'd like.
Yeah.
I won't do as good a job as he will, I
Yeah,
guarantee.
go ahead until he comes back. Yeah, sure.
Well, for about 90 years before the destruction of the Second Temple, the house of Shammai ran the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin, I pronounced it wrong, sorry. And they were not pro-Gentile. Hillel was decidedly more pro-Gentile. And the house of Shammai, because they had control of what is, for all intents and purposes, the Supreme Court of Israel, they enacted what are called the 18 Edicts of Shammai. Now, unfortunately, we do not for sure have a copy of them, so we don't know. We can't say exactly what was in them, but we see the fruit of them all through the first century writings, and Joseph is back. So I would like to turn that over to him so he can teach on what was going on.
Go ahead, Joe.
Oh, I think he's probably, looks like he's having some trouble, so I'll keep going until he can start. We see so many incidences in the Gospels and in the epistles where we're having problems. The disciples are saying, well, why were you talking to that Samaritan woman? And the Samaritan woman says, why are you talking to me? We've got Yeshua making accusations against some of the Pharisees, saying you're not allowing people to enter into the kingdom of heaven, and you're not even entering in yourself. So what was that all about? And the house of Shammai made it very, very difficult for Gentiles to become even sojourners anymore.
Yeah.
What was really going on in Galatia came down to, if you weren't a Jew, you couldn't share table fellowship with a Jew. We see it in Acts 10 where Peter says, you know how unlawful it is for a Jew to go into the home of a Gentile. Well, we don't see that in the Torah, in the kingdom constitution. But that was the fruit of the 18 Edicts of Shammai, which you need to know, the house of Hillel, which is, after the destruction of the temple, Hillel came out on top, and they dictated what what the law was going to be in Judaism.
Yeah. And
So,
go ahead. Sorry.
oh, it's okay. So Peter really, really honestly believed that it was illegal for a Jew and a Gentile to have relations because of the edicts of Shamai. Totally against what Hillel and, like I said,
Yeah.
Hillel gained supremacy. So this anti-Gentile attitude in no way reflected all of Judaism in the first century, but just like Islam today, sometimes the bullies get their own way.
Yeah, and the thing is that we how can I say, we as we learning this, we know that there are levels of kashrut, or the levels of holiness, there are levels of, you cannot expect to have someone come from if the temple, especially when the temple standing, temple standing, the levels of Kedushah are very, very high. I mean, think about it. Peter would have never gone to Cornelius' house unless he would have had a vision. Because Cornelius' house was in Caesarea by the sea. That was an imperial city. Or if not an imperial city, they worship all the gods, and it was completely unclean. So we have to understand that everything that happened in the first century in regards to the argument of all of these new people coming in, and you go from a goy, from a Gentile, to the to the gerim, to the God-fearers, to the to the stranger. The question really is, does the Elohim that we serve makes a distinction when that person truly wants to serve him? That's the question. I mean, if somebody wants to serve the God of Israel, is he going to reject that person when we have a nation built from people from the nations? That's really the question. I mean, go ahead, Ryan. And Joe, I want you to expound a little bit on Shamai and Hillel after Ryan goes.
Well, basically what I wanted to add to that is, the religious systems at the time has started really trying to define things, and basically, like Yeshua says, by your decrees, as we're seeing here with the edicts of Shammai, you are shutting up the kingdom of heaven. They're stopping people from coming in. And, you look throughout Scripture, and we could turn to the Torah in Exodus 12, verse, I believe it's 19, it says this, 7 days there shall be no leaven found in your house, for whoever eats what is leavened, that person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel. That word for congregation is our word idah, right? It says whether he is an alien or a native of the land. That word alien is our word ger there. And as you can see right here, the ger was still considered part of the congregation of Israel. And just earlier in this chapter, we learned that the ger was someone who was uncircumcised. Now, does that mean that this person never was to get circumcised? Absolutely not. Just like Paul never once argues that the people who are turning from the Gentiles should never get circumcised, he argues that they are not justified by circumcision, meaning that they could become part of the kingdom without circumcision. They're justified by their faith, right? By their faithfulness to God, to the covenant. And just like Abraham, it took him 20 years of walking out his faith to get circumcised, just like it took Israel 40 years in the desert, and they got to the promised land, and then they circumcised themselves, created a mountain there. So we can clearly see what Paul is basing his argument on, and the believers in Acts 15, is that no, you don't have to be circumcised in order to join the congregation, but they never say we should never, that they'll never be circumcised, just that they're not justified, they're not brought in, they're not converted through circumcision. And by the way, there was Jews who did not believe in Yeshua who had the same arguments. You can see this in Josephus' writings as well.
It's something that as believers, when Paul is talking in the book of Galatians about justification by faith, if you really pay close attention to the topic and to the subject, it's about the inheritance. Read chapters 2. The whole argument is about putting yoke on people coming into the faith when they don't even know the most basic principles of how to follow Torah. And the argument is you want to be saved by circumcision, when the circumcision was a sign of a covenant, and now these people are justified. Justification. In other words, how can a how can a person from another country be justified to be in this country by having a visa? Let's look at it from a legal immigration issue, right? He is not justified to be in America if he just comes through the border and illegally. He's not justified. He could be the nicest guy in the world, the hardest worker, the smartest guy, whatever, but he is not justified. Thus, he has no rights. But the moment you get a visa, now you're going through the proper channels, and now he is justified to be in the United States. But even then, he's not justified to keep every law because he's not a full-fledged citizen. Now, that really would not make any sense to us until we study the caste system of imperial Rome. That you have what is called the patricians, and you have the plebeians, and you have the freedmen, and then you have the slaves, and then you have women, and you have different caste system. And now, even though you have slaves, you have freedmen, but the freedmen were just a little bit above the slaves, and then you have the two citizens. So only 2 out of the 4 are really citizens. The freedmen and the slaves are not really citizens. So you have a caste system in which you make a distinction between people, just like in modern day in India right now. So what happens is that now you have Paul is trying to tell all these people, we are one in Messiah. In other words, Paul is bringing a message about Yeshua that it was revolutionary in the first century. He's saying, I'm going to give you a gospel, the good news. I'm going to tell you that in the kingdom of the God of Israel, through the mediator or the broker, Yeshua, you will have the justification to be part of the inheritance and the citizenship. And once Acts 15 understood that, then they said, okay, we get it. So now let's give them some basic rules of how to conduct themselves in the congregation. Because the Torah is read every Shabbat, and they're going to grow, they're going to get better. So the problem is whether or not they get in. The problem is, how do we educate the people so that they can make a smooth transition and they don't go from Christianity to Judaism, that they will go from Christianity to the Hebrew understanding of Scripture and the context to a Torah observant or a Torah lifestyle, whatever you want to call it, without going to the authority and the structure of a system of religion. Okay, Ryan had a hand first, and then Tyler. Go ahead.
I just wanted to point out really fast that in these caste systems that we see in the Roman world and even in like India today, it's all based on your birth, right? You're born as a slave, you're born as a plebeian, you're born as a patrician or whatever, and you don't move, right? You're stuck in whatever your born role is, and that's one of the biggest problems with the caste system, is that you couldn't move up in the world. It was because of who your parent is, you're always stuck here as a second-class citizen.
I just wanted to add that the whole reason the Holy Spirit fell on Cornelius and his family was a vindication of God as a God of justice and righteousness and equity, because the legal system that the Sanhedrin had put into place, remember, it was predominantly Shamai, and they were making the calls against the objections of Hillel and his followers. They were saying, when they said that, well, only if you're Jewish are you really one of us. When the Holy Spirit fell on Cornelius and his family, that was an override of everything that Shammai was saying with respect to who is and is not a citizen in the kingdom of heaven. he was saying, well, that's really nice that the Sanhedrin decided this, but I'm a God of equity, and I don't need to obey their rulings. I will accept who I will accept. I am no respecter of persons, as Peter said. I can see now that God is no respecter of persons.
Now, one thing that we need to read, that Tyler said that is important, and I think we need to expound a little bit on this. God is a God of equity, but remember, we know that the Father in Deuteronomy 17, he established a system of judges. He established what is called the Great Assembly. He established order. No one denies that. But even in the United States, there is a system in place. When there's a law, it can be heard to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court can interpret that law and maybe overturn it. Or interpret the law. Okay? So there's a system in place of check and balances. And you got to remember that the concept of being a leader in Israel, they have to walk with how they're described. How the leadership is described to be qualified for leadership. They're not supposed to take a bribe. They're not supposed to do this. They have to do it with righteousness and justice. So the issue here is, we know that Judah has a place and a role. We know that the priests have a place and a role. We know that Israel has a place and a role. But what does the Bible really say about the role of Israel in Acts 15? Let's go to Acts 15. And let's read there real quickly, because I talk about this all the time. And I really don't know why people don't get it. Honestly, especially leadership. Everybody who reads it, who is not basically trying to understand this from a organizational perspective. Everybody who reads it as just for the Bible, get it. But when you're in an organization, you're trying to show the rules of your organization, and we have to be honest with the text, guys. We can't just choose and pick every little word here and turn it upside down for our own convenience. When you read in Acts 15, we're going to read in verse 15 forward, okay? It says, verse 14. When James stands up in verse 13, and he says, and they were silent. Yaakov answered, saying, men, brothers, listen to me. Peter had declared how Elohim first visited the Gentiles to take out of them a people for his name. And you know, Ryan and Tyler, that expression is an adoption language expression. Okay, but listen to the next verse. And the words of the prophets agree with this, as it has been written. After this, I shall rebuild the booth of the tabernacle of David, which has fallen down. And I shall rebuild its ruins, and I shall set it up. Next verse is the key. So that the remnant of mankind, okay, shall seek Yahweh. And with even all the Gentiles on whom my name has been called, says the Lord, who is doing this. So what is the mandate of Israel? Is to go and get the nations who are called by his name. And now, what do you do with them? That's what Acts 15 is all about. All those people who have a zeal for the God of Israel, that are coming in, they don't know the levels of holiness. They don't know about and follow the feast. They don't know how to keep the Shabbat. They don't know what to do. Give them this basic principles of order. And I got to tell you, and Ryan, I need your opinion on this, because you and I have been studying imperial cult. And Tyler, I know you've been looking into it too. But would you agree with me that if we do not understand Leviticus and imperial cult in the first century, those basic rulings that took place, like idolatry, adultery, blood, and fornication. In the Torah, you don't find fornication. That word, you don't find it. You have to understand first century imperial worship to know what that context. And by the way, it is found in the ancient Near East in what is called priestly prostitution. Dedication to the gods. Go ahead, Ryan.
Another thing to consider with that is the attitude of the Pharisees, and this is where this this whole thing with separating, not eating with the Gentiles, comes from. is that Pharisaic Judaism was basically, they took the principles of the temple, the cleanliness, the purity issues, and they tried to apply purity laws for the temple to everyday life. This is why you have the Pharisees coming up and accusing Yeshua of breaking certain traditions, right? Why do your disciples not wash their hands before they eat? Where does it say that in the Torah? No, it says that the priests are to wash their hands right before they serve in the temple. So they had taken certain purity laws of the temple and they applied it to their everyday life. Now, especially Hillel considered, and I do apologize, I don't have the exact quote here. I can pull it up and post it as we go along. But Hillel actually considered Gentiles to be more unclean. He considered them to have corpse impurity, right? And so the whole idea of eating with Gentiles was because they were impure. And Rico, what were we talking about? I'm blanking here for a second. Rico.
What were we talking about?
What did you start off? I went down that to explain something.
Oh, about fornication and purity.
Oh yeah, okay. So, right, the Pharisees, they wanted to separate from the Gentiles. They wouldn't even eat with them. Most of those purity laws were applied to table fellowship because table fellowship was the biggest thing back then. Especially like the Essenes also, they were very big into table fellowship. You couldn't even eat at an Essene table for 3 years until you discipled with them for 3 years. It was huge, right? And so this is what the thing is that they're saying, we don't want us to come in contact with them because circumcision, you got to realize, circumcision was a ritual purity thing, right? That's why it says you cannot eat the Passover unless you're circumcised, because the Passover, because the blood is manipulated on the altar, it becomes holy meat, right? And because it's holy meat, you have to be in a ritually clean state. Well, they're trying to take these purity laws from the temple, like this Passover thing, and apply it to everyday life. The Torah never says that you can't eat with someone who's in a ritually unclean state, but they were applying that, right? And so what this Acts 15 council is showing us is that, no, these are the things, if you want to eat with us, if you want to fellowship with us, these are our 4 purity requirements. You'll notice that every single one of those from Acts 15 is a purity requirement. And realize, too, in the Greco-Roman society, they understood purity requirements as well. They had their own purity system and everything like that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's a problem, making a little clarity here, of taking temple purity principles to apply to everyday life. I think the problem is that, you know, you can eat with somebody who's like he's saying, he's not in the state of, you know, purity like that, but doesn't mean that I'm going to go eat pork with him. You follow what I mean? It's 2 different things altogether.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Make sure that we make that distinction, because right now we're living in a world that we are all in a state of tameh. We are all unclean. You know, and we eat in certain places, and that's why actually I have a tough time. I don't eat in many places anymore. You know, I try to eat at home as much as I can, because we eat different types of food, and you don't know when they mix, you know, the pork and the stuff in the same grill. You know, that's a problem. You know, that is a problem. So, but I think the problem is that you're right. They're taking principles that I think are important, because in every culture they have the concepts of, in India they call them the untouchables, the Dalit, the untouchables. Even to this day, I was watching a video the other night. I went to bed at 2 in the morning, man. I was watching every video I could on the caste system in ancient India and modern India, and also in Rome, and it blew me away how they do all that stuff. You know, by the way, like Tyler just mentioned in the chat, Mexico also has a caste system. In Latin America, they all do. And I was watching this video, and there were kids, and there was a family, and they will not cross the threshold of the gate because the kids were taught that we will be polluted. We cannot touch them. Now, they were a essential part of community, but they cannot go beyond the threshold. They cannot eat with them. They cannot talk to them. They cannot even marry with them. And by the way, when they call them the scavengers in the caste system in India, or the Dalit, or the untouchables, and when they walk through to the village in which belongs to the higher class, the Brahmins and in the other ones, they have to remove their sandals. They cannot go in with their sandals. They have to remove their shoes and walk barefooted through their area, and there is a particular line that after that they can put their sandals on. Talk about a demeaning society. I mean, the Torah, everybody pays a half shekel. In the Torah, we all rule by the same, hey, if you commit adultery, premeditated, the male and the female, if you have the two witnesses, you're dead, regardless of whether or not you're rich, you're poor, or whatever. And the Hammurabi Code, and I'll give it to you, Tyler, and the Hammurabi Code is set also on levels of society, classes of people. The compensation will be different, or the penalty will be different between a freedman and a slave or a citizen. Now, we have to be clear that we cannot serve Messiah and reestablish a caste system within the believers in Yeshua, because then we're not any better and we're bringing shame to our God. We're bringing shame to the Father by doing that. I cannot treat anyone as if they're less of me. I do know that I have a different role, but that does not put me in a pedestal to belittle you, to lord over you, to demand respect from you, to demand submission from you, because a leader leads by example. And a leader lives a lifestyle of submission to Elohim. And then when the people, like my wife, I don't have to tell her, woman, you have to submit to me because I'm the man. If I say that, my wife is going to get upset with me. You know what she told me? She goes, Rico, the reason why I willingly submit with you is because you are submissive to the king. So this vertical relationship is reflected on the horizontal one. And now, if he treats me with equity, I must treat my wife with equity. If he treats me with long suffering, I must treat my wife with long suffering. You listen, I have two kids, my boys. I love them. One is 24, one is 18. But when you see me with my youngest, you will never know he is not my biological son. Everybody assumes he's my son because he is my son. Just because he's not my biological son does not mean that he's not my son. I raised him since he was 7 years old. He's 18 now. So therefore, my oldest never saw a distinction in treatment. They're different people, but I needed to be equitable with both. And that's why I've been able to gain the respect, because extending equity, because my youngest is justified to be in my house. Even though I'm not his biological father, he is justified because I'm in covenant with his mother and I'm in covenant with him. So there's equal rights in our home. He is a citizen, equal rights in our home with the same rights as my oldest. No distinction. And when you start making a distinction between somebody who loves the God of Israel and the natural branch. Now, the grafted branch cannot boast against the natural branch. And this is a problem. We got a problem. Because then replacement theology comes into play. We cannot just go around saying the Jews don't know anything and we don't going to listen to anything they say because they're Jews. Hello, excuse me. They're the natural branch. Israel's a natural branch. We can't go around, just do around. No, because we are part of the tree. So once we understand that the older brother, or whatever you want to call it, Judah, or whatever you want to call it, Israel, whatever you want to call it, they treat us with equity, we treat them with equity, and then the Torah, the lifestyle, we're walking in this path. And the longer we walk and we learn, then we start walking in more unity. Eventually, we're going to be in the same path, walking towards the kingdom. But if the moment I go in and says, no, I'm here, and you're here, then we are instituted within Israel a caste system. And that's not in the Torah. No one is arguing the roles. No one is arguing their right. No one is arguing their position. We are only arguing the equity. And that goes for Christianity too. the system of Christianity. There's a very strong caste system, you know, which goes completely against what Yeshua said. Go ahead, Tyler, you were going to ask something.
I'm just going to go really quick, and then Joe has sound now, so I think we all want to hear what he has to say. As far as boasting against the natural branches, yeah, in Romans, especially in the last chapters, we see Paul's having a real problem with the incoming Gentiles. They are coming into the synagogues, and they are refusing to show common courtesy and decency to their Jewish brothers, especially to the ones who aren't believers in Yeshua. And Paul is saying, you know, you guys aren't being equitable. You are not being respectful. You are flaunting your freedom to do this and that, and you're killing people. And so in order to have equity, there has to be sensitivity all around. So, I mean, there's somewhere between what was happening in Romans and something that, when what was happening in Galatia, there has to be somewhere in between that where there is mutual respect and there is equity, and both sides are being lovingly committed and loyal to each other. And now I want to... Joe's back.
Before you go on, Joe, this is something that I really want to mention. We only going to provoke our brothers in Israel to jealousy when we fully submit to the Torah and we stop trying to figure out that we're better than anybody. But at the same token, like I tell people, I'm not stupid, I can read. You know, I mean, I do my research, and I'm not the authority, I'm not the best, I'm not the only one. I humbly will submit. Listen, Joe has submitted things to me that have made me really think, and I reconsider certain things that I used to teach, not because it was so profound in the information, but it was so respectful in the delivery, and he always treated me with such respect and equity, and it's reciprocal. We're building that relationship. And then when he's telling me something that instinctively I don't want to hear, but the way he presents it is in such a way that I say, you know what, let me consider that. And by the way, I'm guilty of that when we talk to our Christian brothers. We hammer them. And I'm working on not doing that anymore, because the reality is 95, 99% of them have no idea. So Joe, we were talking about Hillel and Shamai. We're going to trace it back. Tell us a little bit about Shamai and Hillel. I want to give you as much time as we got. We got like maybe 20 more minutes. So feel free to expand as much as you can from that and give us a background on Hillel and Shamai.
About 20 BCE, Hillel became the president of the Sanhedrin. Was Menachem the Essay. There was an event that occurred. This is recorded for us in the tractate Shabbat. And we don't have a lot of detail about this. But there was a meeting somewhere, maybe about 10 BCE, somewhere around there, in the home of a zealot. And, a lot of the members of Beit Shammai, or the house of Shammai, were present, and they literally slaughtered the members from Beit Hillel. Now, at that point, Menachem the Essene, who was the vice president of the Sanhedrin, he left. He departed. He went into the wilderness. He took about 80 students with him, and he took about 80 students of Hillel. This left where he was the president of the Sanhedrin, which meant he couldn't vote except at a time, and he had no backing. Now, the majority, everybody except for Hillel, was that point all the way to 30 concubines. So
we're having a little problem with Joe. We're having a little problem with Joe, so we're gonna try to try to get him back. I think where he's at, the internet kind of freaks out a little bit. But we, as believers, we have to be very much aware of what the context of Shamai and Hillel, because that dynamic of Shamai and Hillel is what sets the foundation for the struggle that Paul is going to be having in imperial cities, imperial worship, imperial cult. You know, how do you deal with that? So this is one of the things that I believe can help us get a greater understanding of what Paul is trying to convey, the message of righteousness. How many times, Ryan, how many times does Paul mention righteousness in the book of Romans alone? I mean, for crying out loud, go ahead.
That's the book he mentions it the most. I wanted to add a little bit of background too with the book of Romans, because Tyler brought that up. One thing that we miss when we don't study the background is that Emperor Claudius in I believe it was in 48 AD, Emperor Claudius had because there was a fight over this Christus. They don't know if that's actually referring to like Christos, to Christ, or if this is something else, but it really doesn't matter what the fight was about. All of the everyone who was recognized as a Jew was ejected from Rome. And in fact, we even see this in Acts 18 with Priscilla and Aquila. They had been ejected from Rome, right? Claudius died in, I want to say, 54 AD, and Emperor Nero took his place. And when Emperor Nero took his place, he invited all the Jews back to Rome. Now, during that interim, you had about a 5 to 6 year period where basically all of the fresh believers were continuing on this home fellowship, right? This belief in Yeshua. And now Paul writes about 2 to 3 years after the Jews have been allowed to come back to Rome. So we've got basically this like this assembly that had sprung up from a lot of fresh converts, and really not a lot of fresh converts, but a lot of them had actually been in the synagogues for years. They were the righteous Gentiles. But you've got them who had kind of taken over, and then you've got the Jews who are now coming back, the Jewish, fully Jewish believers in Yeshua coming back. And so Paul is dealing with a conflict on both sides, and he's really, I mean, what he's really saying is, hey guys, knock it off, treat each other equally, right? You guys are brothers, don't boast against each other, don't fight against each other. We're all working towards the same faith in Yeshua.
Yes. Is Joe back? Joe. Joe.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay. I'm not sure where to start because I don't know what's been said. I can't hear you now.
We heard you up till when you were talking about the Essene head of the Sanhedrin who left in the desert.
Yeah, there was a time period that went from about probably 30 years when Yeshua was laid resurrected. During that time period, Beit Shammai basically controlled the Pharisees, and their policy was totally anti-non-Jew. It was separatist, and this was overruled. It was what was called the 13 Edicts, and they were passed at the time that they slew. The same day they slew all of these members of Beit Hillel. Now, before the end of the temple, before 70 Common Era, Beit Hillel gained the power in the Sanhedrin, and they cast out the 13 edicts as being not faithful to the Torah. And that's the background of the problems that we have in Galatians, Acts 15. We have this group that was very, very on the outs with what the Torah was saying. But they had the power, they had the control at this time. And when we factor that in, we understand the comments that Yeshua makes towards the Pharisees. We understand the actions of Paul we understand the politics and the background behind this. But very definitely, this separation was not intended by God. And I believe that everyone that comes into this movement needs to study this background, this time period. I consider it the dark years of Judea at this point.
So, would you agree with me then, Joe, that by them starting to implement the rulings of Shamai, that sets Israel back, because the whole purpose of Israel is to bring the nations to the knowledge of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yes.
You are closing the door to the master plan of the Creator to bring reconciliation of all humanity.
Right. That's what the Epistle of Ephesians is about. That's what Galatians is about. This creating a wall of separation between the two groups. Now, the separation has nothing to do with certain aspects of the temple of who can do what, where they can do it, and so forth. Okay, that's a different subject.
But wait a minute. Let's stop there for a minute, because the problem that we have right now, Joe, is that many people come from the nations. They become grafted in Israel. We become part of the citizenship of Israel, like the Bible says. But now they're changing calendars. Now they're changing the priesthood. Now they're changing the roles. And they don't realize that those things are established. It's like an illegal alien coming over here and changing the whole system of government.
Right.
When they've been given a free citizenship.
We have a situation where most of our people that are in this non-Jewish Torah world are everybody has an opinion, and everybody puts forth that opinion, and it's coming from a lack of understanding of many of the concepts. Can I kind of diverge from this for a moment?
Sure, you're Joe Good. You can do whatever you want, man.
I've had the opportunity, I've had the privilege in working on the temple to meet with the top rabbinic scholars on the temple. And what I found is that we can have respect. Now, these are Orthodox. Most of them are ultra-Orthodox. And I have a tremendous respect for them, and I would call them my teachers. Generally, the idea of a non-Jew going in and discussing and talking and sometimes disagreeing with them is a real big pill to swallow. We didn't know how it was going to go. And it went tremendously well, and I've had numbers of meetings with them. These same men would have a problem meeting with modern Orthodox. They also would have a problem meeting with conservative. And they probably would not even consider meeting with Reform. Now, it's not a matter of whether they're Jew or not Jew. It's a matter of their approach to the Torah. And that I believe that if we have the right attitude as we go in, I believe that if we learn certain aspects that are going to be important to them, and at least whether we agree with these aspects or not, that we have a respect for them, that if we go in, we can sit down and they can and will respect us. Now, they don't agree that I believe in Yeshua, and that really throws them for a loop. However, I can go in, I can call them up and say, I want to have a meeting, and they will set up a meeting for me to come in and discuss issues with them. And there's been numbers of times that I've disagreed with them, that I've disagreed with Rambam on certain things. But what I found is it's not that we are not Jewish. The more have a whole lot with the same move, and they understand people that they say they have have no respect for the.
You're cutting off on us, Joe.
I'm sorry. I've heard it's going from excellent, and I'm just going to have to, if we're.
Okay, so while Joe gets the audio going, I think what he is saying right now really does make a lot of sense. I think that's something that in my walk, I've been able to do with some of my friends that are Orthodox in Israel. That you've met some of them, Ryan, and we talk. And Joe brings a very valid point. I think that we need to understand the difference between agreeing with them and also just because I disagree doesn't mean I don't have any level of respect for them. And I think this has been lost in the Hebrew Roots movement. It's like we look at the Orthodox and we say, well, they don't believe in Yeshua, they have nothing to offer. Well, that's not true. They don't believe in Yeshua. I have a problem with that, but they have a problem with me believing in Torah and I'm believing in Yeshua. But I have learned a lot from them. I don't have a problem accepting that. The problem is that if we don't approach them in a manner that is respectful, they're not going to hear our side. But then you're going to find crazy ones that no matter what we say is going to be good enough anyway. But we can't worry about them. We got to worry about, just like a lot of pastors. There are some pastors that you can sit for hours and have a nice dialogue like Joe and I had with a pastor in Houston. Really nice guy. The problem is, are we going to have a show level of respect to one another and respect where we're at? That's what makes it work. Go ahead, Ryan, and we're going to finish right after you take it here. Okay, buddy?
I just wanted to make a little plug for us stopping the anti-Christianity stuff. For the most part, it's not that Christianity. I mean, yeah, most of them or some of them reject Torah outright, but for the most of them, especially the conservative groups, they try to keep God's commands right as best they can. They're ignorant of some of them. Right, but even Sabbath, they're ignorant of the day, but a lot of them still try to keep the Sabbath per se according to how they believe it, right? So it really will help us reach out to them and be able to guide them in the same way if we don't belittle them and just call them a bunch of pagan Gentiles, right? And acknowledge the fact that yes, they have studied, yes, they do have traditions, and their traditions were for the desire to follow God's commands. It wasn't that they were just rejecting God. They've just been misled, just like we all have been misled, right?
Yes, we all have been misled, and this is something that I'm learning to balance, that I don't need to compromise the truth to appease a Christian person. I don't need to compromise the truth to appease an Orthodox person, but there's got to be a common ground where we can say, okay, let's talk and let's compare notes here. Because we know, Ryan, that the last 2 or 3 years now, almost 4 years, I think it is now, going on 4 years, a lot of our research have come from anthropologists and archaeologists that are Jewish. They're not necessarily Orthodox. And a lot of the research from Christian scholars in the early 1900s and all through the 1900s that are not necessarily Torah observant. And the stuff they say is life-changing and is revolutionary, but they still keep to be Methodists and Baptists, and sometimes I'm puzzled by that. But we have the opportunity to learn from them, appreciate what they have to offer in the research, but bring the balance of the observance or the following of the Torah as a lifestyle with the proper context, not to minimize anything. But the reality is that we know that the Judaism of today, and Joe can tell you this, anybody who studies research know, that the Judaism of today is not the same one as the first century. I mean, it's like the Christianity of today is not the first one as in the first century. It's the same thing. It wasn't even called Judaism. It wasn't even called Christianity. You follow? So we have to deal with all that baggage. I want to thank Tyler and Ryan, and I also want to thank my friend, my mentor, and teacher, Joe. Give me your website again, Joe, so everybody knows where to find you. And by the way, I want everybody to know that Joe Good is my teacher in the temple. I learn a lot from him, and I'm very proud to have somebody like him teaching me, and I'm learning from him. I'm excited to keep learning from him. By the way, I want to announce in January 7th to the 10th, it's going to be Ryan, Joe, and myself in Orlando, Florida for a in-depth temple service course. Don't miss it. It's $250 for 4 days, 5 sessions of an hour and a half a day. If we reach our numbers, then we'll be able to provide lunch and the Shabbat dinner. We don't want anybody to go without food, obviously. So you're going to get a lot of information. 20 sessions for an hour and a half. That's a lot of hours. You know, so consider coming and joining us. Go ahead, Joe. Thank you. Thank you for being part of the panel. Thank you for believing in us. And thank you for teaching us. We're very grateful. Can I hear you, Joe? Can I hear you?
Let me try this. Can you hear me now? Okay. Thank you for all your kind comments, and I've enjoyed being with all of you here. And I've got a website, JerusalemTempleStudy.com, with all types of materials that you can download as a member, and we have a course on the temple that's very, very involved. Also, we have hatikva.org, and we have a class we teach every Tuesday. We have it Thursday night, tomorrow night, as we were knocked out last night because of problems. So that's 7 o'clock Central Time.
That's it. That was kind of short. Well, thank you anyway, man. And we are so looking forward to getting all your years of information and helping us. And I hope that I pray that we can share things with you that would edify you. We are learning. We're not above correction. We want to work from one another, edify, and I want everybody out there who are watching to know that we want to be accountable with each other. One of the things that people don't realize is that when I teach, I always run it by Joe, certain things, or I always run it by Ryan or by Daniel. And, you know, I make sure that I don't put out a teaching before going through people that I trust will tell me the truth and what I need to hear, not what I want to hear. And that's a blessing to have people that can be straight up with you and tell you, you know, that you should just wait a little bit on that, or consider this perspective. And because ultimately, guys, it's about edifying the kingdom. It's not about building the most teachings that anybody can have. It's how can we uplift the name of the Creator and honor him the way he deserves. I want to thank every single one of you for joining us. We will not be here next week. We'll be here the week after. I'm going to be in Puerto Rico, but the guys can take care of it. I hope that they don't just, you know, create so many problems and then I have to fight with them. But anyway, they won't do that. Love you all. Thank you for joining us, and I pray that this is a blessing to every single one of you. And Joe, Ryan, and Daniel, Tyler, Daniel was here earlier the other week, and RC, thank you for making this happen. Shalom to all of you. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.